For the record, my name, a little scratchy, my name is Wendy Thomas, and I represent the town of Merrimack, which is a heavily contaminated town with PFAS. I'm one of the water warriors from the town that has been working on PFAS issues since 2016. Now, last term, we passed a bill, we being the state of New Hampshire, passed a bill prohibiting the sale of specific consumer products that contain PFAS in them. As that was passed and it was signed into law, as we discover new applications, it's going to be added to this list of consumer products that are being banned in New Hampshire. So this bill specifically bans the sale of ski, boat, and board wax. The boating industry has approached me. They have no problem with this bill. The ski industry has approached me. They have no problem with this bill. We currently sell non-PFAS wax in New Hampshire. Someone told me he was getting ready to wax his cross-country skis. He went to his regular ski shop, checked out the wax, found out it had PFAS in it, called a couple of his local ski shops and found one that didn't have PFAS in it. So it does already exist. So why do we want to get rid of this specifically in New Hampshire? And it's because if you're a skier or if you're a snowboarder or if you're a boater, you know the wax goes on the outside of the equipment. And because there's ice and water, it degrades the wax and then the PFAS from the wax goes directly into our water system. We're finding PFAS in concentrations. They're low, but they're there around ski mountains, which is very alarming. Many of you are already familiar with the danger of PFAS, and I just want to remind you that in our town, we have a lot of people who are sick with PFAS, from PFAS contamination, and the primary source in Merrimack is our water supply. Just to give you an example, I use this all the time. I live in an older neighborhood. In my street, we have 4 houses that still have private wells. All 4 private wells are contaminated with PFAS. In house number 1, the dad has died of kidney cancer. In house number 2, the dad and the adult son have died of colon cancer. House number 3, the dad is currently dying of prostate cancer that has spread to his bones. House number 4, that's my house. My husband had a quadruple bypass at age 50, and I have breast cancer, and my kids all have autoimmune issues. All of these symptoms are related to PFAS exposure. This is not a nuisance chemical. This is a deadly chemical that if you are exposed to it long enough, it will harm you. So this is just a bill to get rid of wax that contains PFAS in New Hampshire. We don't want it. We want to stop it going into our water system, and that's the purpose of this bill. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to have you back.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Thank you for coming over.
Thank you.
I guess today you get to sit in front of me. Yesterday I was in front of you. So you're saying, my question, I guess, is if we don't have this in our products now, why do we need to ban it? I guess it's just a simple question that I...
No, it is. You can still find it in the products
Okay.
that are sold in New Hampshire.
Oh, all right. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you said we weren't selling it in New
No,
Hampshire.
no, it's
Okay.
still there. It's still there. That's why my friend had to go to a different ski shop, because the one that he originally went to had PFAS in the wax.
Thank you for clarifying. I misunderstood.
And professional skiers also have stopped using PFAS. I mean, they recognize that this is an unnecessary danger to the environment and to people.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I have
Thank
nobody
you.
else who wants to speak on this. Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing. Is there a motion to move into exec?
So moved.
Thank you.
All in favor of exec?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, is there a motion on the bill?
Move up to pass.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Seeing how there's no discussion, all in favor of ought to pass?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none? Consent?
Yep. Consent?
All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none? Senator Waters?
Yes.
Seeing how it is a Waters bill.
Yes, that's right. I'll wax out.
You wax out.
Okay.
Yes, you will. I'm sure. All in favor of consent, and just, we already did that. Okay, so thank you very much. And so motion to move out of exec.
So you want to do another one while we're waiting?
Do we have time? Sure. What do you want?
Gotta make sure
Do you have anything on your?
I
79,
think there's one we could do. What was it?
179. I've got an amendment
179?
to it. Yep.
Let me take a look.
Congratulations, Representative.
Yeah, this one's fine.
I'd move ought to pass,
On,
179.
is there a second?
Second. Yeah, second.
Discussion.
I'll offer amendment 1086S.
179.
You should have the amendment here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right here.
Right here?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
All right, you're recognized.
I need a second.
Second.
Second. All right.
Yeah, I thought we did that.
Mr. Chair, when we heard this bill, I had a little bit of concern raised about the, on line 4, that the 100% of the cumulative penalty would essentially double the fine. And so, as I looked at this, and I went to OLS and talked about some discussions, and it seemed more reasonable to me to make that penalty 25%, so that no one would ever pay more than 125% of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Because 200% seemed excessive, so that's what the amendment does, and I think it's a little more fair.
Right. Further discussion on the amendment 1086S. All in favor of the amendment 1086S?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Is there a motion?
Pass as amended?
Okay, seconded by Senator McConkey. Discussion, all in favor of ought to pass as amended?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, consent.
I'll second consent.
Who consented?
Senator McConkey?
Senator McConkey, all in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm happy to take this out if you'd like.
Okay, Senator Pro would like to take this out.
No, I didn't say I'd like to, I said I'd be happy to if you'd like.
You're the man for the job.
All right, motion to move out of executive, anybody?
Second.
Second, okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Thank you. All right.
I gave you 15 minutes, maybe you could do it.
All right. I can't see the clock because there's a glare on it.
Yeah,
It's 9:10.
19, okay.
Oh, wow, we're just like on fire today, huh?
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to exec?
I don't know.
Like which one?
$189,221.
189?
What about that?
504,67.
No, we got to talk.
Okay.
Let's talk on 189.
No, we gotta talk about these.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. I don't want to push it because I actually didn't hear these.
Yeah. All right. Yes, that's why I did not.
Yeah.
accept
Okay.
that.
All right.
I gotta run back.
Strategize.
Yeah.
I left my, oh, there, it's right there. Sorry, I left my phone.
All right, so what's the next? What's the next bill is 460.
Potential disposal of the yard.
Trash. So we got yard waste.
Is this the one of these that they put on the? Yeah. 416 FN and hear from the prime sponsor. Hello, prime sponsor. How are you today?
Very well, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for this opportunity to bring forth HB 416 to you. I've been before this committee before to talk about the threats of cyanobacteria blooms in our state. And I'm not going to rehash any of that, but one of the most important strategies for mitigating cyanobacteria blooms is to keep nutrients out of lakes. And specifically with this bill, it deals with yard waste. It is a practice by some people in the Lakes region that when they're doing spring cleanup or fall cleanup, they just leaf blow all the debris into a lake or a river. And you'll see floating little piles of this debris going down. But what happens is that debris then goes into the water. It starts degrading. It releases phosphorus and nitrogen, which serve as nutrients for cyanobacteria bloom. So this bill, as it was amended in criminal justice, which that was an interesting committee to have it assigned to, and with the recommendation of DES, is we just are inserting it into Chapter 485A, which relates to water pollution and waste disposal. In that section, it defines bottles, glass, crockery, cans, scrap metal, junk, paper, garbage, tires, old automobiles or parts thereof, trees or parts thereof, or similar litter. We want to be explicit in this chapter to add yard waste so that as an educational component, if this bill passes, we can tell people, hey, that's against the law to do that. And I'm sure people will comply with the law. So I ask that the committee pass 416 as amended, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters?
I know we may hear from DES during the hearing, but we do have a letter from them, maybe
Yes.
soon, that says they think this is already covered. So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's covered. I mean, if you read the chapter, it says trees or parts thereof or similar litter. And I'm sure Mr. Deers would be happy to comment on that, but it can be it's so general that people may not read that and say, oh, that's yard debris. So by adding yard debris in there, it'll make it very clear to the public that this is not something that should be going into our waterways.
Can I follow up?
Follow?
Yeah, and then on line 22, where you're striking the purposely, now this is a felony under this charge.
Well, for the
And I'm wondering why the purposely is struck.
I would defer to Mr. Deers for that because this bill as amended was recommended. The amendment was actually a technical preparation by DES. So they did that, but they did add on line 17 for a first offense, any person who purposely or recklessly violates paragraph 1 shall be guilty of a violation. So it is a violation for the first offense, and that would apply to anything else that people deliberately throw into a waterway.
What about accidentally?
I don't believe accidentally would be covered under this chapter. He could comment on that. It really is purposely, and I also know with history with DES is they typically will approach a violation as an educational opportunity first. So they may go to someone and deem if that person knowingly or purposely violated, if they did it by accident or they had a pile of leaves and the wind blew it in. I think they would just use that as an opportunity for education. But I'll let him comment on that.
Thank you.
Follow up? Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you for
Thank you.
your testimony. Andrea? Yeah, big pile of leaves and leaves and hello. Yeah. You have, go ahead.
Good morning, I'm Andrea, President of New Hampshire Lakes, and I'll keep this short. You have two letters coming around, one from us, New Hampshire Lakes, and one from the Rivers Management Advisory Committee in support of this bill. And we are in support of the intent of this bill for all the reasons Representative Rung just described. I know a number of our community have reached out to you all over email over the past couple days. Lake associations, this would really help them having this, explicitly listed in law, yard waste, meaning grass clippings. We see a lot of grass clippings get dumped into our lakes, and people don't associate that with, the other types of waste explained. This would really help lake associations do outreach so that a lot of people just don't know that dumping these things into the lake isn't a great idea. So I think we see this as a way for lake associations to do outreach so that folks don't even find themselves in this situation. So with that, I have to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you very much.
I have nobody else wanting to speak on this unless somebody else in the audience. Oh, I have a hand. You're not Samantha. You're, no, I'm kidding. You can call you Sam. I'm just kidding.
Call me whatever you want, just not late for dinner.
Yeah.
Good morning, my name is Ted Deers. I'm the Assistant Director of the Water Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And having been implicated by the sponsor, I shall attempt to address some of those comments. Again, I think as the chair noted, or perhaps it was Senator Pearl noted, that we did not take a position on this bill, that we put in a letter, which I think you have in front of you, which describes that we think that this is largely covered by existing law, that's for sure. What we have, I think one of the things that does resonate is this idea that yard waste is somewhat difficult to pull out of that list. And appears, as we've heard from testimony from other people, it appears more common than you might think. And so having that specifically is good. The original bill, I think, did three things, just so that just sort of put this in context. It called out yard waste specifically. It identified that there were some fines associated with that, and it gave municipalities some ability to enforce on this particular statute. Those are the three things it does. It's three things it continues to do. One of the things that Senator Waters brought up was how the penalties work on this, which is probably why it ended up putting criminal justice over in the House, which, by the way, I would like to say that I was able to click off one of my committee bingo chits by being able to go and speak to that committee. So I'm feeling pretty good about that this session. But essentially, the way that the statute is currently written, the current law, is that if you intentionally throw your automobile, if you park your jalopy into Lake Winnipesaukee, that is a crime, intentionally doing that. And there's a series of penalties that would follow through that. And so that was the sort of nature of the bill as it sits, the statute 485A15 as it is today. One of the things of simply just putting yard waste into that bill that we identified, putting it into this particular part of statute, was that it didn't sort of identify what happens before you get to that point. Obviously, there's a big difference between, putting in, 20 tons of garbage versus someone blowing their leaves into the lake. Obviously, those are very different kinds of activities. So understanding that and being able to create a system that actually sort of recognizes that was important to us if this were to become law. And so we took that opportunity to be able to identify those corrections, those technical corrections in the bill. I think that was.
Senator Waters has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have one?
Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Ted. So I care about the language here because we're getting to the felony level.
Sure.
You used the word intentionally, and it doesn't appear in statute. So what we have are purposely, recklessly,
Right.
and knowingly.
Right.
And these things have definitions, and they
Yes.
also have a kind of a hierarchy.
Yes.
Now, purposely is that, that the person, that the goal was to cause the criminal conduct. Knowingly, the person might be practically certain that the conduct would cause a particular result.
Sure.
So that's why I'm concerned that on line 22,
Yes.
that it is a lower standard,
Okay.
but it is a felony.
Right. Right.
And so I think that if you're gonna have a felony here, that purposely is what you're looking for, not knowingly, because look at above on the even for a second offense, you know, it's misdemeanors.
Sure.
And you got purposely or recklessly up there, and then you're dropping down to knowingly for a Class B felony, which is a higher charge. So I don't get it. I'm not, you know, attorney, but, you know, we have a hierarchy, and it seems to me this is a higher crime but a lower standard.
Does it do great damage to the bill if we unstruck that word?
I don't believe so. I am not the attorney.
I think, would you check?
Yeah, I'm going to check with, because that's not the, that was kind of
I
opposite.
think it should be purposely and not knowingly. You had purposely or knowingly, which gave some flexibility in the charging, right?
Right.
But if you're striking purposely and just got knowingly, I think that's. I think
We'll take a
that's
look
the
at that.
problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of understood it from talking with our attorneys the opposite way. That is how I understood it from their perspective. So I want to make sure that that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so
Senator
check it
McCarthy?
out.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steers, wonderful to see you again.
Good to see you.
I just have, ease my mind if you could.
Sure, sure.
All right, so I live on the lake. My neighbors all live on the lake. A majority of the weekend people, seasonal people pay for landscapers, come in, mow their lawns.
Yep.
Clippings are taken, they're gone away. I think one of the greatest things that's happened with your department and with the help of the Lakes Association and others is education. If I think of how lakeside properties and runoff and septic systems and everything else were thought of as a second thought over 10 years and where it is now, the education is working. So my question is, a lot of people on Ossipee Lake don't live on the flat, they live on a slope. A lot of them have grandfathered or permitted walkways that get their grandchildren down to the water. And a lot of people own these little things that go brrr with a battery that have a blower, light flow of air. So if someone goes down to clear leaf, debris, and so forth, because we want to keep as many trees and canopy as we can to keep a pathway going down there, and an angry neighbor spots them mowing every day, or excuse me, blowing a light amount of debris that makes itself to the lake, and they are knowingly doing that activity to clear their property, would we subject that poor homeowner grandfather to a felony or a fine?
So I think,
I'd like to be assured that light maintenance like that
Right.
really has no effect.
yeah, I'll answer the question two different ways. And thank you for the questions. I think it's a really important one. We get a lot of neighbor versus neighbor issues, as you are fully aware, sitting in the various seats that you've sat in on different organizations and such. And so we are able to understand very clearly when that's going on. And so we are able to understand that. And the first thing that we ever do when we have a complaint like this, if there's a complaint like this, is we go talk to them. You know, I have, in my 28 years of doing this work, I've brought, under these statutes, the water quality statutes, I think I've brought 3 different complaints beyond the talking to stage. So I think that says kind of and that is, I think, we take seriously our title of environmental services. And so we do provide those services, those outreach services. The second thing I would say is that we have a lot on our plate at DES. And so the condition that you describe of a minor, you know, sort of way that, you know, that I would happily tell the complainant that thank you we appreciate that. This is the education that can be done in your community. But that sits at like number 1,365 on my list of environmental concerns right now. And so that's generally the way that we handle these sorts of things.
Thank you.
Just on that vein, all right, so you got trees, it's fall time,
Sure.
and my deck is filled with leaves. And one day, and you go out and you use your blower, and the leaves go into the water.
Right, right.
It's on a Ring camera next door. And then the next day, the same thing happens. And the next day, and the next day, until, there's no more leaves falling on your deck. Is that a violation? Or do they have to sweep their deck in the spirit of this bill?
Yeah, again, I think that would be so minor. I mean, any one of these things, if you put one aluminum can in the lake when you're out in the shallows, I'm sure it was a can of Pepsi and not anything else.
This is
But
not an advertisement.
are you in violation? Yes. Is that going to cause you to somehow have the environmental police come and take you away? No. I think this is always the thing with these kinds of issues, is that there is absolutely degrees of how these things get looked at. I think that we would make the case, and a lot of times, if those leaves are falling, if your deck is right there at the water, those leaves would have gone into the water had it not been for your deck. That's I think that is natural. There are leaves, there are trees around the lake. They do fall into the lake. It's really, the issue is not that. Okay. The issue is really somebody taking 3 acres of lawn clippings twice, 3 or 4 times a month, and dropping them into the lake, or also into the stream that's going into the lake. That's the kind of activity that would rise to us ever taking some sort of action. And again, that action would start with us. Hey, do you know that that's killing your lake? Because that's really where it starts, and that's generally where it ends.
Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I really understand and applaud the process of DES. However, on lines 10 and 11, it says the authority to enforce this section shall extend to all peace officers in the state of New Hampshire. So will DES educate all police officers to the kind of ways to approach these potential violations? Or, should it say that the authority to enforce this section shall extend to all peace officers in the United States when requested to do so by the DES? Or is it just going to say, well, the DES might not even be involved in an officer going out and arresting somebody?
I believe, I'll answer this in a couple ways. One is that we didn't ask for this bill. We didn't ask for that particular part of the bill. What we did was we provide where in the statute would you actually put that provision if you wanted it. So we're not necessarily in support or opposed to that particular issue. How we would deal with it is we would do outreach just like we do to all communities. And I think that you've heard from Lake advocates that they're going to do the same. This is not uncommon. This kind of provision is not uncommon in a number of different statutes, that local authorities do have the ability to enforce those statutes within their own jurisdictions. Not dissimilar to the way that some of the invasive species, some of that kind of stuff is handled in 47.
Let me interrupt and follow up, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
So what's your interpretation of this? It says the authority to enforce this section shall, now, I would read that to say that enforces this section just means section 2. So it would be just that the police could order them to remove items from the lake, so that this would not, the authority here is not new potentially, except to say that the police could order somebody to remove the waste, not just you.
I would buy that interpretation.
All right, so that's different then. That's probably
Yeah.
a different thing. Okay. All right, we can think about it, but, all right.
Further questions? Come on.
Yeah.
All right. Seeing none.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Anybody else want to chime in? Going once, going twice. We are closing the hearing on HB 416 FN. And give you a second to get your thoughts. We're not going to evict this today. Oh, thank you. Okay, we're gonna open up the hearing to HB, I believe 87, nope, 690 FN. And we'll hear from the prime sponsor. Grab the wrong folder. There it is. You have the floor, Representative.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, committee members. My name is Representative Dr. James Summers. I represent Rockingham District 20. I introduced this bill, HB 690, FN, to the Senate committee. This bill has basically taken many forms ever since 2010, when the chairman and myself were freshmen coming up here to the House Representatives, representing Nashua. This bill has come up in different ways. Basically, as before, it's been committees and it's been commissions. This takes a different approach at it, where it's actually an investigatory docket conducted by the Department of Energy to basically answer the same questions we've been looking for almost 2 decades now. It looks at the different costs and benefits of being a member of ISO New England. It brings up the if there's any cost shifting, different changes or charges that are New Hampshire is being enforced due to other states' legislative changes or requirements. It also looks at the what benefit we receive through testimony we received, that 17%, that New Hampshire creates 17% of the power that is within ISO New England. However, we utilize only 10% of that. So to understand not only the power generation in New Hampshire, how it's being utilized, and yet how we're being charged, and how legislation from other states within New England are being passed upon us. Both the Department of Energy agreed that they were neutral on the bill, but they'd be willing to investigate on this bill. Also had the consumer advocate actually testify for our committee in Science, Tech, and Energy, that they were in favor of the bill, as well as basically understanding these questions as of ISO New England within the committee, and also in the media have declared that a lot of these questions they don't even know themselves, but they'd be willing to investigate them if they were asked formally by the state of New Hampshire. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Biggie. Senator Waters.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Would it be fair to say the kind of nub of this question when you raised the cost shifting was that, I mean, since generation and transmission are obviously separate, as other states have more distributed energy resources, renewables and other things, that the percentage of the charge for transmission, since New Hampshire is doing much less of that we're paying a little higher percentage of the transmission rates than other states, because they're more renewables. And so is that kind of the nub at what you want to get at?
Understand, right, exactly, the customer, why we're paying more, also because transmission, especially when you brought transmission, is basically, from what we understand, is shared across all the states combined, because it's not just a state impacted issue, it's across the entire state, across all 6 states, to basically understand the amount of generation that New Hampshire contributes to the grid, what the usage of what we're actually utilizing, and then how much of that transpires to the overall grid, how much of the cost overall, or any climate change or different political changes from the bills we receive, that New Hampshire's paying for, that other states have decided to make.
One more question. So I guess it's just kind of general question of what really might come out of this that couldn't be discovered already, in that we are asking ratepayers to pay about 200 grand out of their pockets because this will be recoverable cost through the Department of Energy. So we're asking folks to spend $200,000 on a study which may or may not answer the questions, or, I mean, what do you, it's hard to ask ratepayers to cough up 200 grand when we're really not sure what we're getting.
I think the benefit of this is the questions that we do receive, the benefit of it would be, is that the state would be able to actually, with not have the knowledge of some of these answers, if not all of them being answered, we'd be able to look at this in investigatively by the legislative as well, to understand if there's further legislation needed to cope or correspond to a particular question or response to any one of these questions, in further legislation down the road that might save the ratepayers tax money as well.
One last follow-up? Thank you. So would you expect this investigation to try to put a cost figure on New Hampshire, if it's not an ISO New England, which does transmission, it does markets, it does planning for future generation power needs and transmission lines, that the cost of doing all those and being able to actually negotiate with other states that who would no longer really have to cooperate with us. So are those kind of costs something you expect this group to be able to articulate, the personnel? I mean, you have to hire dozens of people, for sure.
That's correct, Senator. It actually includes it does include in here the cost if we did go on our own, what would be charged to us if we ever made that decision to separate.
All right.
That's included in there as well.
Thank you.
Senator Pearl, do you have a question?
No, I think I'm.
So I have one. Did the House already put this in their budget?
I think, I don't know if the Finance Committee has actually heard it or not yet.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mark, did you want to talk about this?
We're not taking a position. I mean, maybe I'll address a few things after if you want.
I saw your head going like this. You're very animated. I'm going to get a bobblehead of you, but I appreciate it. If you have anything, we'd be interested.
I'll add a few things.
Okay.
If you want.
Yeah.
So thank you. For the record, Mark Brown, here today representing Consumer Energy Alliance. We're not taking a position on the bill. And for those on the committee that aren't familiar with CEA, we're a national trade association, about 20 years old, founded in 2006 to kind of bring together and improve the dialogue between energy producers and consumers. We have about 400 affiliate members that span most of the economy in the U.S., agriculture, farming, transportation, construction, energy producing, utilities, all of it. Our board is comprised of companies like General Electric, Nucor Steel, and Caterpillar. So again, we're not taking a position on the bill, but it is worth kind of taking a look at this. This is not a partisan issue, and this is not isolated to just New England. These conversations are going on all over the country. Both political parties are dissatisfied with the way the markets are performing. Some feel like, renewable energy isn't being properly incentivized. Others feel that dispatchable generation isn't being properly incentivized. Senator Waters, you mentioned the RNS charges is what you're referring to with transmission. There hasn't been a whole lot of movement in RNS charges over the last 15 or 20 years. New Hampshire has been roughly 10% of the regional mix. Massachusetts, which has invested tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars in behind-the-meter resources and energy efficiency have been right around 44, 45%. So I don't think the question is, with regard to transmission charges, are we paying more or less because we aren't investing enough? The question is, what are the net savings, right? Has all these investments that Massachusetts has made, and it is tens of billions of dollars, resulted in transmission charges that are so much lower that they're saving consumers money? I don't think the evidence would show that, but this may be something that's worth looking into, with this study. So, again, when it comes to generation mix, when it comes to, the cost shifting of states, are we paying for other state policies through the markets? By we, I mean New Hampshire, So anyway, I just wanted to address really that transmission issue because there's no evidence to support the fact that we're paying more for transmission because we aren't investing enough in behind-the-meter resources. That's just not factually correct, and the data doesn't support it.
Any questions? I see the squirrels going, man. Okay. All right, seeing Mark, I appreciate you stepping up to the plate. Mr. Kreis.
Excuse me, I think my name is on there as well.
Okay.
Are you just going in order?
I beg your pardon?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that my name is on there as well.
Oh, yes.
Have her up.
Yeah.
Because she's a rep.
I apologize, Representative. Don, if you can give way to Representative. Sure.
Sorry.
And Representative Horgan's here too as well, right?
I think he just signed in and then he left. I don't know if he's speaking.
All right. I apologize, Representative.
No, that's okay. For the record, again, my name is Wendy Thomas, and I represent the town of Merrimack. I'm going to read to you the speech that I delivered on the floor in opposition to this bill. While it may appear to be a simple investigation, let's be clear, this is the first step towards a misguided and costly attempt to withdraw New Hampshire from ISO New England. First, look at the title of the bill. It doesn't suggest that we find ways to improve the system and make things simpler or more cost-effective. Instead, it directs the Department of Energy to investigate New Hampshire's withdrawal from ISO New England and strategies that could impact ratepayers in relation to New England's environmental policies. Withdrawal. ISO New England is what ensures we have a reliable, affordable, and stable power grid. It manages the flow of electricity across 6 states, balancing supply and demand in real time. If we leave this system, we cut ourselves off from this interconnected network, exposing our residents to unnecessary risks. If New Hampshire withdrew from ISO New England, we would be like Texas that uses ERCOT, and which avoids federal regulations and maintains self-control over its energy policies. It also creates several significant vulnerabilities and challenges. So let's look at Texas for a little bit. Since Texas is not interconnected with the neighboring grids, it cannot easily import electricity during emergencies. When power generation fails, as was seen during Winter Storm Uri in 2021, Texas cannot rely on other states for support, resulting in widespread blackouts. People froze to death in their homes during that storm. Texas grid isolation leaves it vulnerable to extreme weather events, including both winter storms and summer heat waves. Without access to external power reserves, shortages are more likely to put residents at risk. ERCOT operates under a deregulated, energy-only market that incentivizes low-cost production rather than reliability investments. Power generators are not required to maintain excess capacity, meaning that the grid lacks a safety buffer during high-demand periods. Unlike other regions regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, ERCOT operates independently. This allows Texas to sidestep federal reliability standards, which can lead to inadequate infrastructure maintenance and fewer protections for consumers. Because of its deregulated market, electricity prices in Texas can skyrocket during crises. During that Winter Storm Uri, Electricity prices surged to the state-imposed cap of $9,000 per megawatt hour, leading to financial ruin for consumers and energy providers alike. Wholesale power prices outside of Texas averaged $34.84 per megawatt hour in real-time energy market in October 2024. To put this in perspective, 1 megawatt hour is enough energy to maintain an average household for about a month, give or take, depending on temperature, climate, and weather conditions. Imagine opening up your energy bill, expecting to pay $34.84 and getting a bill for $9,000. Power plants and natural gas infrastructure in Texas are often not weatherized against extreme cold. Since ERCOT has minimal regulatory oversight, there is little enforcement to ensure companies take preventive measures. And we seriously want to consider that here in New Hampshire, where we have cold winters and we're seeing more and more weather events. This bill pretends to offer a neutral study, but let's be honest. We already know the cost of withdrawal. Exit fees, duplicative services, and a loss of regional collaboration would only drive up rates for consumers. Worse yet, we would sacrifice reliability. When extreme weather hits, we rely on the grid's ability to draw power from neighboring states. Abandoning that safety net would leave us incredibly vulnerable. Additionally, this study would waste taxpayer dollars on a hypothetical scenario that has already been examined in other states. Connecticut recently explored withdrawal and found it to be infeasible and economically reckless. Maine studied it as well in 2020 in a 2020 memorandum titled ISO-NEXIT, which explored the legal feasibility of withdrawing from ISO New England. The conclusion was clear. While legal pathways did exist, such a move would lead to significant uncertainty and complexity. Post-withdrawal, New Hampshire would depend on third parties for transmission and reliability services, and FERC could even block the withdrawal. In other words, disengaging from ISO New England would put New Hampshire in a difficult position, and we already know that. So why should we pay for another study to arrive at the same conclusion? Instead of pursuing this costly and speculative dream, we should be focusing on real solutions like expanding renewable energy, improving grid resilience, and advocating for fairer market reforms within ISO New England. That's how we protect our ratepayers and secure our energy future. There's two other points that I wanted to bring up. One is the fiscal note says that it would be at least $200,000 to do this investigation. The Department of Energy does not have the expertise or the experience to look at this investigation. They would have to hire a lawyer, they'd have to hire energy consultant, at least one, maybe more, and engineers to look at this. For $200,000, you're going to get a cover page if you hire those people. The second point I wanted to make is that when I explain this bill to my constituents, and hardly anybody understands the energy bills, but when I explain this bill, no matter which side you're from, there's universal condemnation on this idea. They understand it. They've heard about Texas. They're not interested in this. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? So Connecticut and Maine already tried this, you said?
Maine did a full study. Connecticut stopped the study halfway because they said, it's obvious and we're just paying money to spend money.
So the ugly question is it because New Hampshire's subsidizing them?
No, I don't think that was part of the
Okay.
conclusion, but
All right, I just throwing that out there. That's just,
Okay.
No further questions. Thank you very much for your
You're
testimony. All right, seeing how Representative Horgan is not here, I'd like to hear from Don. Try this again. And Rob, you didn't sign whether you were going to talk or not.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I missed you last week.
Well,
I'm sorry that Senator Rosenwald isn't here today to ask me about colonoscopies again, which is what we were talking about.
We don't have to go back there.
Max, strike that from the record, please.
I'd finally forgotten that.
Well, that subject might be more apt today. Anyway, good morning, Senators, and thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. As you know, my name is Donald Creese, and I have the honor of serving as the state's consumer advocate. My job and that of my staff is to defend the interests of the state's residential utility customers. I testify today in strong support of House Bill 690. However, my reasons for supporting the bill are separate from the purpose articulated by the sponsors, which is, as you've already heard, to insulate ratepayers from costs associated with New England's environmental policy. As a strong proponent of energy efficiency, I think the insulation is already adequate to that purpose. The bigger and more important question is, what is ISO New England and who does it exist to serve? In my judgment, at present, ISO New England exists to serve not the region's electric customers, who pay the enormous costs associated with our regional transmission organization and depend on the transmission grid and wholesale markets, but rather the big out-of-state corporations that have always dominated and continue to dominate the production and transmission of electricity in New England. And I'll name a few names for you. The region's biggest transmission owner, Eversource, based in Connecticut; Constellation, based in Maryland; NextEra from Florida; Hydro-Quebec, I think that might be based in Greenland; National Grid in the UK; Iberdrola from Spain. I could go on. It is hardly surprising that ISO New England is governed and run in a manner calculated to favor the interests of these entrenched legacy companies. Regional transmission organizations came into existence in the last decade of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st, not because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission ordered these companies or their predecessors to form them. Rather, FERC asked nicely. So, of course, what we got in response to being asked nicely were market rules, transmission planning processes, and regional tariffs whose very purpose is to ensure lavish profits and hegemony to the owners of what was once a vertically integrated electric utility. Here is my favorite nonfiction book of all time, The Power Broker by Robert Caro. In 1,161 compelling pages, it tells the story of Robert Moses, the technocrat who managed to ruin metropolitan New York City in the 20th century by worming his way into various jobs, which he held simultaneously, in which he was absolutely unaccountable. If you have ever driven through New York City or tried to ride the subway there, you know the place is a mess, and you can thank Robert Moses. Well, Robert Moses was to 1950s New York what ISO New England is to modern New England. There is, of course, NEPOOL, the anachronistically named stakeholder advisory body, and the word advisory, by the way, is in air quotes, to ISO New England. NEPOOL is a very powerful body, but it has two characteristics that should worry you. One is its sector-weighted voting rules, which assure that nothing happens unless big generation and big transmission want it to happen. The other is the fact that it is not a public body. It is rather an example of what Professor Shelley Welton of the University of Pennsylvania Law School has aptly named membership club democracy. Well, I married a Princeton graduate, and I'm familiar with eating clubs at Princeton. The eating club model is no way to run the region's electricity grid. And don't get me started about the ISO New England Board of Directors, which is a bunch of retired utility executives that is essentially self-perpetuating. Now, I want to talk for a second about the bill's fiscal note, because Senator Avard, I think, rather aptly asked, is this in the budget that the House is about to send over here? And the answer is, it is not. And if you read the fiscal note carefully, you see why. It is because the Department of Energy has said that in order to conduct this study, it will need to hire outside consultants, and to do that, it will rely on its statutory special assessment process, which is basically a process by which the bill can be sent to the state's utilities, presumably the electric utilities in this case, and then the bill will get passed on to ratepayers. And that is money being spent that should or reasonably would worry you, except I don't think it's necessary to spend $200,000 studying this question. In part because, as you've already heard from my friend Representative Thomas, that Connecticut and Maine have already taken a hard look at this question. I think we can build on the insights that they developed, and I think we can rely on expertise that we already have at our disposal, both inside the Department of Energy. Inside my office, I have a very capable director of regional and federal affairs who knows a lot about ISO New England, and the ISO itself has a big team of government relations specialists who are capable and arguably charged with explaining what the organization does to either you or the Department of Energy or whoever ultimately is going to conduct this inquiry. So I don't accept the premise that we're going to have to spend big bucks in order to figure out or in order to understand better what ISO New England does and whether it's truly serving the interests of our region's ratepayers. So yeah, the sponsors of House Bill 690 are onto something when they say it's time to take a hard look at whether ISO New England is meeting the needs of New Hampshire's electric customers. That's all of us. Will such an inquiry result in New Hampshire leaving ISO New England? Frankly, I doubt it. But it will shine some light on this powerful, unaccountable organization. And, as Justice Louis Brandeis memorably observed, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Thank you for considering my testimony. I'd love to have some questions.
Well, I'm going to give you one. So Representative Thomas basically used the Maine and Connecticut as a reason for her disapproval of this bill. You're using it as a approval of this bill that we can build upon.
Yes, and again, because I think there's a documentary record of those two inquiries that we can use, and I think what it will what those documents, what that research reveals, is that the cost of withdrawing from ISO New England would be huge, and there would be tons of litigation because we're so integrated with the rest of the region around us. And I think Representative Thomas made some good points about what happens when you isolate yourself as a state electrically from the rest of the electricity grid. I mean, Texas has a lot of autonomy because it doesn't subject itself to regulation by FERC because its electric grid is not engaging in interstate commerce. And they've made some interesting policy choices, and they've paid for them, as Representative Thomas just explained to you.
Senator Pearl.
Morning, great to see you again.
Great to be here.
So there's 13 different questions that this bill would charge the Department of Energy with investigating. Are there any others that you, from the consumer advocate perspective, think that we should add to this?
Yeah, I think the relevant questions have to do with the governance of ISO New England and whether the organization is structured in a way as to, as I said, perpetuate the economic interests of the legacy owners. And again, I don't necessarily blame them. They were asked, like, what would it take to get you to agree to do this? And they exacted, their price. And what you have, when I was testifying about this bill over in the House, I brought a picture of the chart that describes all the different arrangements that govern ISO New England, and I said it looked like the Guernica by Pablo Picasso. It looks like a piece of 20th century abstract art. It is so complicated.
One more.
Maybe more like a Jackson Pollock.
And thank you. And my second question is, you sort of alluded to something that I was thinking as I listened to Representative Thomas explain why it was a bad idea. I think that sort of gives us a basis for looking at things not to do. So do you agree that perhaps the information, you sort of touched on this, the information that's out there is going to help guide us to a lot of these questions without having to spend any money to do so?
I would hesitate to say that it would be free, but I do think that we already have access to expertise that would allow us to answer both the questions that are currently in the bill and the questions that I just suggested to you.
Thank you.
I would assume you have a question.
A follow-up actually on Senator Pearl's about, the things that you mentioned on that, and I, talking with you and observing ISO New England are problems. And certainly I looked in a couple of years ago into passing legislation that would direct Eversource not to participate in any non-public meetings at ISO New England, because that's a problem. But in the bill itself, the things that you mentioned, none of the duties here are ones that you've mentioned. So that if we were to amend this bill, we would need some very specific bullet points as to what would get at the things that you have mentioned. So.
Indeed, and having heard essentially the same question from both you and from Senator Pearl, I would be foolish if I didn't readily volunteer to help you amend the bill if that is what would make the Senate more comfortable with the legislation.
Thanks.
Follow-up? No more follow-ups, okay. Thank you, Don, appreciate it.
Thank you. Colonoscopies are great, by the way.
I wasn't going. You missed a line.
I guess I missed something.
There's more to that.
Yeah. All right. Chris, I would ask you to come up, but I wanted to, seeing how Eversource was mentioned, does Eversource want to say anything? Eversource does not, okay. And I'll give you the last word, Chris. Chris Helms from the department, because you're the only one left to speak. Figure I'd give you a full,
Much appreciated, and Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you. Good morning. For the record, my name is Chris Helms. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Energy, and I'm joined by our Regional Policy Director, Dan Phelan. So as Representative Summers mentioned, the Department of Energy is neutral on House Bill 690, but we certainly are comfortable with it and are ready, willing, and able to conduct this investigation if directed by the legislature. I plan to be relatively brief, but I did want to touch on a couple of points. I think this bill does ask important questions. You know, is the regulatory structure of wholesale electric procurement working for New Hampshire? Is being a member of ISO New England and the New England grid working for New Hampshire? Is it setting us up for failure, or is it protecting us from even more difficulties? We have heard time and time again how difficult withdrawal would be from a technical, cost, legal, regulatory, practical perspective. Undoubtedly, there are difficulties. But what are they? You know, can we put numbers on it? Can we identify the hurdles with specificity? Are there any obstacles that are insurmountable? Or can we learn some lessons and find opportunities that we can identify? So the bill, as mentioned, has many, many questions. I would want to point to the question marked M for Mike on page 2, line 4. What alternative regulatory structures could the state explore that would better allow it to serve reliable, affordable electricity to its citizens? As we've heard, right, there are a lot of challenges about specifically leaving ISO, and even leaving ISO New England could have different forms, right? You know, to the extreme end, it could be, okay, we're cutting the wires and creating just the New Hampshire grid. But it could explore other things like, how do we participate in the wholesale markets that are administered by ISO New England? Or are there other structures that could help us better figure out how we're going to procure electricity? Senator Waters, you and I have talked a lot about the difficulty in building infrastructure, difficulty in building generation and transmission in New Hampshire. You know, I know we've been on different sides of the conversation related to power purchase agreements, things like that. But what this study might tell us, maybe those types of structures are going to be a better way for us to get what we need for reliability, for affordability. You know, I will say, Chairman Avard, in the time that I've been involved in energy, you know, last several years, and probably beforehand in your case, but you've been really, really good on keeping the focus on transmission costs. I think that I've heard you say that time and time again, that transmission costs are something that can't be ignored, right? And that really is a big, big cost driver. And so, you know, kind of to the question of costs associated with this investigation, you know, we're looking at something like $10 billion in the next 7 to 10 years in transmission investments that are going to be made. New Hampshire, as we talked about before, is going to pay 10% of that. So when we're looking at the potential for whether it's a couple $100,000 for a consultant on about $1 billion in costs just on the transmission side, let alone any sort of other benefits to the system. There really are, sometimes these costs are going to be able to pay dividends for ratepayers. So as was mentioned, it would be ratepayers who would bear the costs of whatever consultants or expertise needed to be acquired for the state. But what I think is left out of that is the potential benefits. So is this type of study, I think it's fair to say, there's probably some fat to trim, some opportunities to find cost savings for ratepayers. And so that investment of a couple $100,000 upfront one time could pay long-term dividends on an annual basis to the New Hampshire ratepayer. We hire consultants, with frequency. We've been directed by the legislature. In just last year, I can think of a couple, and I have them written down. We've hired consultants for a pole attachment fee formula. Looking at that, was something that this committee passed. We passed Senate Bill 603, so we have consultants to look at saving the 603 area code, which I'll just say we're going to hear more about soon, but we've made some really good progress on that, and right now it's out to 2029. We've hired staff for the interconnection rules and moving forward with that. In our dockets at the PUC, we hire consultants. In rate cases, we just talked to the governor and council at the breakfast a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about some of the savings that we've been able to advocate for, the consumer advocate has been able to advocate for in those PUC proceedings. There's an upfront cost with consultants, but what we're coming back and looking for in reductions is far, far outpaced it. So, up to the legislature whether or not you want us to undertake this endeavor, but I do think it's likely that the benefits will outweigh the costs associated with hiring any consultants. I will say, looking at the scope of the questions, what we would hire consultants for, it wouldn't be just, staff to run the program, right? We do have that. It's for that in-depth economic or engineering analysis that we might not have in-house because it would cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to pay somebody to keep them on staff to have the engineering expertise that might be necessary. So things like that, they would be, targeted and focused on getting expertise that we don't have in-house, and I think that there would be financial benefits to that. Again, neutral on the bill, up to the legislature to direct us, but happy to take questions.
Senator McConkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Holmes, thank you for taking my question. Listening to the earlier conversation here, is it fair to assume, or will you, if this bill were to move forward and given the direction and given the possibility of funding, do I have some assurance that the questions brought in by Don and others, the representative beforehand, that you will make known to your consultants when you do this that you have a certain base here, which is Connecticut in the main, and that they will take that into consideration?
Absolutely, and if I miss anything here, Dan can add to it. But what we would do is we would put out an RFP where we would lay out all those requirements, and I think it would be malpractice for us to not get involved with other work that's been done in here. We'd be talking to all the stakeholders, whether it's ISO New England, whether it's the utilities, whether it's the power generators, the whole gamut of folks. And I think people have mentioned this is a national, there are cases where people are looking at this throughout the country. We've heard from people across the country about benefits, about drawbacks of participating in a regional transmission organization. We'd want to hear from those folks nationally. We'd want to invite them to hear the perspectives of states that have moved away, that have moved into an RTO, what some of those benefits are.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. And so, Chris, in lines 3 to 5 about the investigation, I do recall that sometimes we have made explicit reference to RSA 365:37 to make sure that you have that authorization, but it's not in here. Wouldn't it make sense to explicitly mention it?
Thank you. That's a great question, Senator. If you wanted to, that would be okay. I think our reading of the bill as written was that it would fall right in a easily usable use. So I don't think it would change the bill much, but if it would, it would certainly give us the clarity that we are allowed to use that statute to do this. So
Although I may follow up, I'm really concerned about ratepayers. 200 grand doesn't sound like a lot spread over the whole state and, whatever. But I think we are likely to see really, really tough cost increases in energy costs over the next couple of years, whether it's tariffs or whatever, for whatever reason, or we get a bad cold winter or something. So I wondered about, based on what you just said about the sources that the RFP would mention, and what Don Kreis has said, that we might put a dollar limit in here of, say, 100,000. And because otherwise it's kind of a carte blanche and we don't protect the ratepayers. And related to that, respond to this, please. I don't think for this study, you're doing all the engineering about what would it be to create a new transmission grid that we pay for or this or that. I think it's a much higher level look at all this, because give us some, maybe there'd be some sense from the other studies, but I really would hope there'd be ways that if we set a budget, that your RFP could reflect tasks that could be complicated. Because also this list of questions are so vague, and I don't even understand some of them. I don't think the language is just, I don't know. Some of the language about referencing other federal thises or that's or something, I don't really know what it's talking about. So anyways, the bottom line question is, if we put some protection for the ratepayers here so that it just doesn't grow, or 200,000 seems like a lot of money.
So I agree with you that it sounds like a lot of money. I will say regularly, the reason that number was chosen is that's kind of that sort of low to average cost for consultants in these fields. Excuse me. Excuse me.
It's good work if you can get it.
Yeah, yeah, no, and you really deal with high-level niche consultants who are pretty costly. I would say $100,000 would be a pretty limited, set of expertise that we'd be able to bring forward. And I think, have spent more than that on significantly smaller issue areas. So, to the extent that there are concerns about benefits flowing back to ratepayers, again, up to the legislature if you want to put that dollar limit there. But we have seen regularly that what we've invested in that expertise has paid for itself time and time again. Ratepayers are first and foremost our concern as well. We don't want to waste money on something like that, but we do want to make sure that if we're given a task by the legislature, we're able to do it in a way that serves the people in New Hampshire as best as possible. So yeah, anytime we go out for an RFP and we have a contract, we'll get something back, we'll get that bid, and there will be dollar limits associated with that folks can't go over. But I think putting that into the legislation would probably be unnecessary.
If I may, another one. You heard the conversation around Don Kreis's concerns about the way NEPOOL was run and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts about adding a couple of points if you worked with him on what they might be?
Well, so it's something that the legislature is going to direct us to investigate. So if it's something that the legislature is going to direct us to investigate. So if it's part of the menu here, we're going to look at it and we'll definitely make sure it's answered. I think part of the unease that you are expressing about the topics listed here is just how difficult a question this is and what the actual answers look like. Because it could look like New Hampshire is Texas. It could look like New Hampshire is Vermont at the end of this. It could look like a wide variety of policy decisions could come up, and that would be the benefit of doing something like this study.
If I may, just to, I get it. I put together a lot of bills like this, and it's just like, everything but the kitchen sink. I know, but there are some things here. The vagueness troubles me because it may make it more difficult to limit the effective role of the consultants. And that's, can a regional market balance varying policy goals or, yeah, I mean, there's just, I know, I trust you to work that out, but it's a messy bill, in the language. Now, my one particular question on that, if you look at line 22, it says, where do ISO New England markets currently shift costs? That seemed to be a foregone conclusion. Wouldn't it be better to say, do ISO New England markets currently shift costs?
Well, so we have.
Or how do they? I mean, anyways, or if they do?
We have a statutory obligation to argue against unreasonable cost shifting between the 6 New England states. And I think a key part of that is the unreasonable aspect, because costs are, driven by all sorts of different policies. Different local siting decisions can cause other states to pay millions of dollars. And so I think that is looking, in my interpretation, at sort of what the playing ground is like. And hopefully this study would allow us to better do our statutory goal of arguing against unreasonable cost shifting.
So if I may, what I hear from that is that you would think it would be a good idea to add the word unreasonably before shift costs. If that's the standard that you use.
I think I was expressing that this would get us towards a baseline, and maybe perhaps that is too broad if you're interested in narrowing the range of it.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, gentlemen, appreciate your time. I have nobody else wishing to speak on this, going once, going twice, going 2.5, going thrice. All right, we're going to close the hearing. And we're done. Thank you. So